The silence in my living room wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of heavy, dust-mote stillness that settles after a funeral or in the moments before a storm breaks. I sat in my armchair, the leather worn smooth by decades of Sunday afternoons spent reading, and watched my daughter, Jessica. She was perched on the edge of the floral sofa, the one her mother, Martha, had picked out 30 years ago because she said it looked like a garden in bloom. Jessica looked uncomfortable there. She kept shifting her weight, tapping her manicured nails against a ceramic coaster, her eyes darting around the room like a bird trapped in a greenhouse. She wasn't here to check on my blood pressure. She wasn't here to ask how I was sleeping in the 6 months since Martha passed. She was here to scout the perimeter. "Dad," she said, her voice pitched in that high, overly bright tone people use for children and the infirm. "Have you thought any more about what we discussed last week?" I looked at her, really looked at her. I am 79 years old. I spent 50 years as a master carpenter. I know how to measure twice and cut once. I know how to spot a flaw in the grain before the saw even touches the wood. And looking at my daughter, I saw the rot. "I like this house, Jess," I said, keeping my voice low, raspy. "I built the cabinets in the kitchen. I laid the floorboards in the hall." I know," she sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "But it's just so much for you to manage. The stairs, the yard. Assisted living has maintenance staff, Dad. It has security." Safer. That was her favorite word lately. Safer for whom? Safer for me, or safer for her inheritance before I spent it on frivolous things like heating bills and property taxes? Her eyes drifted away from me, scanning the room again. She was appraising. She looked at the antique grandfather clock ticking in the corner, German movement, worth maybe $3,000. She looked at the silver tea set on the sideboard, a wedding gift from 1945. And then her gaze landed on the mantel. There, resting on a small wooden stand I had carved myself, was the family Bible. It was a massive thing, bound in cracked black leather with gold leaf lettering that had long since faded. It had been in my family for 4 generations. It held birth certificates written in fountain pen, death notices clipped from newspapers that no longer existed, and pressed flowers from weddings that happened before electricity was common in this county. It was the history of us. But Jessica didn't care about history. She cared about liquidity. She knew I kept important papers in there. She had seen me tuck envelopes between the pages when she was a child. She thought that's where the deed to the lake house was. She thought that's where the cash I withdrew last week, $10,000 she knew I had taken out, was hidden. "I'm going to make some tea," I said, gripping the arms of my chair and pushing myself up.
I made a production of it. I groaned. I let my knees pop. I shuffled my feet, feigning the slow bone-on-bone grind of a man whose body is failing him. I wanted her to think I was weak. I wanted her to think I was slow. "Sure, Dad," she said, waving a hand dismissively. I walked to the kitchen. The hallway floorboards creaked under my slippers, a sound I usually loved, but today it felt like an alarm. I turned the corner, out of her sight line, but I didn't go straight to the kettle. I stopped at the hallway mirror. It was angled perfectly to reflect the living room. I watched her. The moment I was gone, she moved. She didn't check my pill organizer to see if I was taking my meds. She didn't look at the empty fridge to see if I had groceries. She moved with the silent, predatory speed of a thief. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and walked straight to the mantel. She didn't hesitate. She reached out and snatched the Bible. It was heavy, but she handled it like it was styrofoam. She didn't open it. She didn't look for the cash. She shoved it deep into her oversized designer tote bag, a bag that probably cost more than my first truck. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder, sat back down on the sofa, and pulled out her phone, scrolling as if nothing had happened. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't the fast, panicked rhythm of fear. It was the slow, heavy thud of a judge bringing down a gavel. I went into the kitchen. I filled the kettle. My hands were trembling, but not from age. I was trembling from a cold, white-hot rage that settled in my gut like concrete. This was my daughter, the girl I had taught to ride a bike on this very driveway, the girl I had held when she cried over a broken heart in high school. And now she was robbing me in my own living room, stealing the very book that recorded her birth. I waited for the kettle to whistle. I poured the water. I placed 2 cups on a tray. I walked back into the living room. The mantel was bare. The absence of the book screamed at me, a gaping hole in the smile of the room. It was the centerpiece. It was the heart of the house, and it was gone. I set the tray down on the coffee table. The china clattered. "Here we go," I said, lowering myself back into my chair. Jessica took a cup. She didn't look at the mantel. She didn't look at me. She blew on the steam, her face a mask of bored indifference. I gave her a chance. I had to give her one last chance. "Jessica," I said, sipping my tea, "did you move the Bible? I was reading Psalms this morning." She froze, just for a second. Then she looked me dead in the eye, took a sip of her tea, and lied. "No, Dad," she said, "I haven't touched it. You probably left it in the bedroom. You know how you are lately." She paused, tilting her head with mock concern. "You're getting so forgetful, Dad. It's worrying. Maybe it's time we talked about that memory care unit again." I stared at her. She was gaslighting me. She was using my age, my grief, and my vulnerability as a weapon to cover a felony. She wasn't worried about my memory. She was banking on it failing. She wanted me to believe I was losing my mind so she could take control of everything else. If you have ever felt the sharp knife of betrayal from the person who is supposed to protect you, if you've ever been treated like a child in your own home by the people you raised, listen closely. Because I didn't call her out. I didn't scream. I didn't demand she open her bag. I let her sit there. I let her drink my tea. "Maybe you're right," I said softly. She smiled. It was a shark smile. "It's okay, Dad. That's what I'm here for." "Yes," I said. 10 minutes later, she stood up. She slung the heavy bag over her shoulder. The weight of the Bible pulled the strap tight against her silk blouse. "I have to run," she said, checking her watch. "Client meeting, but think about the facility, okay?" "I'll think about it," I promised. I walked her to the door. I watched her walk down the path to her BMW. She threw the bag into the passenger seat with a careless thud. She backed out of the driveway, the gravel crunching under her tires, and sped away without a wave. I walked back into the living room. I went to the window and watched the dust settle on the empty road. She thought she had won. She thought she had the deed to the lake house tucked inside that leather cover. She thought she had the leverage to force me into a home and sell my life for parts. But she didn't open the book. If she had, she would have seen that the deed wasn't there. The cash wasn't there. But in Psalms 23, nestled between "the Lord is my shepherd" and "I shall not want," was a cashier's check. A check for $250,000. It was intended to be her inheritance, an early gift I was going to give her next week for her birthday. I knew she was in debt. I knew her client meetings were mostly with creditors. I wanted to help her. I wanted to give her a fresh start. But alongside that check was a note, a handwritten letter on my personalized stationery that changed everything. By stealing the book, she hadn't just taken the money. She had activated the clause in my living trust that I had finalized with my lawyer yesterday. The clause was simple. It was the bad faith provision. It stated that if any beneficiary was found to have stolen, misappropriated, or removed assets from the estate without permission prior to my death, they forfeited their entire share.
And the proof? The proof was the Bible itself. I sat down in my armchair. The silence returned to the room, but now it wasn't lonely. It was expectant. It was the silence of a trap that has just been sprung. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Elias," I said when my lawyer answered. Elias asked. "She took it," I said. She looked me in the eye and lied about it. There was a pause on the line.
Elias was a good man, an old friend. He hated this as much as I did. "I'm sorry, Tom," he said softly. "Don't be," I said. "She made her choice. Now we make ours," Elias asked. "Running," I confirmed. "I have it all in high definition, the theft, the lie." "Okay," Elias said. "We'll proceed as planned." "Sunday dinner," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at the empty spot on the mantel. My daughter had stolen my Bible. She thought she had stolen my future. But what she didn't know was that she had just stolen the rope I was going to use to hang her greed out to dry. I leaned back and closed my eyes. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures," I whispered to the empty room. "And sometimes he leads you right into the valley of the shadow of death, just so you can show the wolves that you are not a sheep." Hit that subscribe button, because what my daughter doesn't know is that she didn't just steal a book. She stole the trigger to a trap I set 10 years ago. And on Sunday, the jaws were going to snap shut. The silence in my house changed in the 48 hours after Jessica left. It was no longer the heavy, stagnant air of a tomb where an old man sat waiting to die. It was kinetic. It was charged. It was the silence of a bowstring pulled taut, vibrating with potential energy just before the arrow flies. I didn't sit in my armchair and mourn. I didn't pace the floorboards wringing my hands over the betrayal. I worked. I went into the small office off the kitchen, a room cluttered with blueprints and sawdust that Jessica always wrinkled her nose at. I sat at my computer, an old machine, but functional, and I plugged in the SD card from the nanny cam. Jessica had insisted I install it for safety, claiming she wanted to be able to check on me if I fail. She never imagined that the safety measure she installed would become the witness for the prosecution. I watched the footage. It was crisp, high definition, capturing every dust mote dancing in the afternoon sun. I watched my own back retreating to the kitchen to make tea. I watched Jessica's face change the moment I was out of sight. The mask of the concerned daughter vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating hunger that made my stomach turn. I saw her stand up. I saw her snatch the Bible. I saw the smirk, a tiny, self-satisfied twist of her lips as she shoved my family history into her tote bag. Then I watched the lie. I watched myself walk back into the room with the tea tray. I watched myself ask her the question. And I watched her look me dead in the eye without a flicker of hesitation or guilt and tell me I was losing my mind. I saved the file. I burned it to a USB drive. I put the drive in the breast pocket of my Sunday suit, right next to my heart. It felt heavy there, a digital stone ready to be cast. Sunday arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. It was fitting. I dressed slowly. I put on my best suit, the charcoal wool one I had worn to Martha's funeral. I tied my tie with steady hands. I polished my shoes until I could see the reflection of a man who was done being a victim. I climbed into my truck, a 1995 Ford F-150 that had hauled more lumber than most lumber yards. It rattled and groaned, but the engine was strong. I drove to Jessica's house. The driveway was paved with pavers that cost more than my first workshop. There were cars already there, a Mercedes, a Lexus, a Range Rover, her friends, the high society crowd she was so desperate to impress, the people she was drowning in debt to keep up with. I parked my rusted truck right in the center of the driveway, blocking the path to the garage. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt good.
I walked to the front door. I could hear the laughter inside, the clinking of glasses, the hum of expensive conversation. I rang the bell. Jessica opened it. She was wearing a dress that probably cost $2,000, her hair perfect, her smile dazzling. But when she saw me, the smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She scanned my suit, checking for stains, for wrinkles, for anything that might embarrass her. "Ha!" she exclaimed, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her lips were cold. "So glad you remembered to come." She said it loud enough for the people in the foyer to hear. A little dig, a little reminder to her audience that I was frail, that I was slipping. "I know the way, Jessica," I said, my voice steady. "I drove here the day you moved in." "Of course you do," she said patronizingly, patting my arm. "Come in." I walked into the foyer. The house smelled of expensive candles and ambition. I saw David standing near the fireplace, holding a beer. My son. He looked uncomfortable in his blazer, tugging at the collar. He had his mother's eyes and my hands, strong, capable hands that he used to fix motorcycles. He had been estranged from Jessica for years, tired of her drama and her demands for money. But he always showed up when she played the family card. He saw me and smiled, a genuine expression that warmed the room. "Hey, Pop," he said, walking over and giving me a hug that cracked my back. "You too, son," I said. "Busy," he said. We stood together, a little island of reality in a sea of pretense. Jessica flitted around us, introducing me to her friends as my father, the carpenter, with a tone that suggested it was a quaint, adorable hobby, rather than a trade that had fed her for 18 years. Dinner was announced. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with enough silverware to perform a surgery. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Jessica sat at the head of the table, the queen of her borrowed kingdom. I sat on her right. David sat on her left. The guests filled in the rest. The wine flowed. The conversation was vapid. Golf scores, kitchen renovations, the stock market. I sat silently, eating the braised short ribs. They were good, I had to admit. Jessica had always had good taste, even if she couldn't afford it. I waited. I let the main course finish. I let the dessert plates be cleared. Then I picked up my spoon and tapped it against my water glass. Ding, ding, ding. The room quieted. Faces turned toward me. Some looked amused, others impatient. Jessica looked annoyed. Her smile tightened. She stood up, smoothing her dress. "Dad wants to say grace," she announced to the table, rolling her eyes slightly at her friend across the way. "He's very traditional. Go ahead, Dad. Keep it short, okay?" I didn't look at her. I looked at the centerpiece, a sprawling arrangement of white orchids. "I don't want to say grace," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it projected. It had the timbre of a man who had shouted over table saws and hammers for 50 years. The tremor was gone. The hesitation was gone. I stood up. I pushed my chair back. I looked at David, who frowned, sensing the shift in the air. Then I turned my gaze to Jessica. "I want to read from the good book," I said. "Jessica, could you fetch the family Bible? I seem to—" The effect was instantaneous. The color drained from Jessica's face as if I had pulled a plug. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hand fluttered to her throat. She froze, trapped in the headlights of her own lie. She stammered, her voice thin and reedy. I don't have it, Dad. I told you. You lost it." The guests looked back and forth between us, sensing the tension. "That's strange," I said calmly. I reached into my breast pocket. I pulled out the USB drive. I held it up. It caught the light of the chandelier, a small, silver object that looked insignificant but held the weight of a judge's gavel. Jessica's eyes widened. She stared at the drive. I turned to the massive smart TV mounted on the wall behind me, a 60-inch screen she used to show off vacation photos. I walked over to it. I plugged the drive into the side port. Jessica lunged. "Dad, don't! You're confused!" David stood up, blocking her path. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a wall. I used the remote lying on the sideboard. I selected the file. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The high-definition image of my living room filled the dining room. There was Jessica, clear as day, standing by my mantel. The room went deathly silent. On the screen, Jessica looked around furtively. She snatched the Bible. She shoved it into her bag. She sat back down and checked her phone. Then the audio kicked in. My recorded voice asked. "No, Dad," Jessica's voice replied, crisp and clear from the speakers. "You probably left it in the bedroom. You're getting so forgetful lately." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the dining room was deafening. It was a physical weight pressing down on everyone. Jessica's friends stared at their plates, at the ceiling, anywhere but at her. David looked at the screen, then at his sister. His face darkened with a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. He said, "You stole Mom's Bible?" Jessica was trembling. She looked like a cornered animal. She looked at her friends, seeing their judgment. She looked at me, seeing my resolve. "You!" she shrilled, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. She knocked her wine glass over. Red wine bled across the white tablecloth like a wound. "He's incompetent! He was going to lose it!" "Assets," I repeated softly. I walked over to the sideboard where her designer tote bag was sitting. I knew she still had it. I knew she hadn't had time to go to the bank to try and crack the safe deposit box she thought the deed led to. She kept her valuables close. I picked up the bag. I reached inside. I pulled out the Bible. It was heavy in my hands. The leather was cool. I walked back to the table. I placed the book in front of my empty plate. "Open it, Jessica," I said. "Dad, please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Not here." She didn't move. I opened it myself. The spine cracked, a sharp sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. I turned the pages. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. I reached Psalms. I turned to chapter 23. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." There, nestled between the pages, was a cashier's check. I pulled it out. I held it up for the room to see. $250,000, I read aloud. A gasp went around the table. One of her friends choked on her water. Jessica's eyes bulged. She stared at the check as if it were the Holy Grail. "This," I said, my voice steady, "was your birthday present, Jessica. I withdrew it last week. I was going to give it to you next Wednesday. I know about the credit cards. I know about the second mortgage. I wanted to help you. I wanted to give you a fresh start." She reached for it. Her hand shook violently. Her fingers clawed at the air. "Dad, I didn't know." "But," I interrupted, my voice sharpening. I reached back into the Bible and pulled out a folded piece of stationery. "You didn't wait. You didn't ask. You stole." I unfolded the note. I held it up. "This note," I said, addressing the room, "is a holographic codicil to my will. It states clearly that if this Bible is removed from my home without my permission, the bearer acknowledges that they have acted in bad faith and thereby forfeit their entire share of the estate." She screamed. She lunged across the table, grabbing for the check, knocking over the centerpiece. Water and orchids spilled everywhere. "That's my money!" David stepped between us again. He caught her wrist. He didn't hurt her, but he stopped her. He looked at me, then at his sister, with disgust. "He just did," David said. I looked at the check in my hand. $250,000. It represented 50 years of early mornings, of sawdust in my lungs, of missed holidays. It represented my life. I took the check in both hands. I ripped it in half. The sound was loud in the silent room. Rip. Jessica screamed. It was a primal sound of loss. I ripped the halves again, then again. I let the pieces flutter down like confetti onto her expensive, wine-stained Persian rug. "The shepherd's rod and staff, they comfort me," I quoted softly, looking her in the eye. I closed the Bible. I picked it up. I handed it to David. "It's yours now, son," I said, "along with the house, along with the accounts." David took the book. He looked at me, his eyes shining. "I want to," I said. "You never asked for it." I turned and walked toward the door. Jessica wailed behind me, "Dad, wait! I'm sorry!" I didn't stop. I didn't look back at her sobbing on the floor among the ruins of her dinner party. I didn't look back at her friends shuffling awkwardly, grabbing their purses, desperate to escape the scene of the crime. I walked out the front door. The night air was cool and fresh. The rain had stopped. The moon was out, silver and bright. I walked to my truck. I climbed in. The seat squeaked, a familiar, comforting sound. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of the secret, the weight of the suspicion, the weight of the betrayal, it was all gone. I had lost a daughter, yes. That ache would never fully go away. But I had regained something more important. I had regained my dignity. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the driveway, leaving the McMansion and the Mercedes behind. I drove toward the highway, toward my small house with the roses out back. For the first time since Martha died, the silence in the cab wasn't empty. It was peaceful.